Well, folks, I know everyone's starting to wear down a little bit. Okay. Can I have your attention, please? Todd Brown, yeah, we got your attention. Thank you for listening. That's right. Todd's going to give us a restricted firearm demonstration if everybody doesn't sit down. So we're practicing our concealed carry here in Free Enterprise, Alberta. So let's get started. We've had a busy day, but I guess now we're getting down to the nitty gritty where it's all fine and dandy to talk about all these good things, but now we need to try and decide where we go from here. And I don't know where I saw it. You've seen that said that no one plan is the best, but it's best to have one plan. And so, irrespective of what plan we come up with, let's spend a little bit of time and try and come up with one. So, John has been at home and he's been diligently collating all the questions and one thing or another, at least to the best of his ability, and as slowly as we've sent them in. So we're going to start off right now, and John's going to basically he sort of started off by saying where we were going. Now we're going to talk about the questions so far, and so he'll put them up there, and once he's done speaking, then we'll decide how we're good. Oh, time out, just a second. Oh, you know what? John isn't here yet, so he's ready. Oh, good. Okay, yeah. I did actually send him a text, but that's how modern communication goes sometimes. So anyway, John is here and John is ready. And so, John, welcome back. Thank you for
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Now we haven't got your volume yet, but we'll have it on in a minute. Okay, can we hear? There we are. Okay, welcome back, John. We'll let you sort of outline the questions where we're at now, and go ahead and make a pitch for. Go ahead before you start. Make a pitch for your climate discussion nexus. We realize that they're one of your groups that pays your bills, and if somebody doesn't pay your bills, they won't get paid because we don't pay you anything. So go ahead and put in a pitch for the ones who do pay you. So go ahead.
Well, thank you for that. Hello again, everybody, more or less. And yes, I am, among other things, the executive director of the Climate Discussion Nexus. And if you are not already a subscriber to our newsletter and also to our videos on YouTube, please do sign up. Speaking of things that might make a difference, and I know that the climate change policy is one of the things dear to your hearts. Our YouTube videos have had over 4 million views now. In fact, nearly 4.5 million views. So we are making a difference. We're helping get the word out, including telling people you're not alone. And as Danny rightly says, it does all cost money. And so, although times are tough for everybody, if you can find a couple of bucks a month for us, please do make that pledge. Now, back to the EEA, which also deserves your support, of course. When I didn't see you last time, and I must say, I really hope that next time we can do this in person. We're doing our best with Zoom, but it's awkward. Even I do have two screens here. So when I want to go over and look at the other screen, I look like a moron on the camera. And yet, if I don't, then I can't see what I'm doing. So, oh, maybe I'll manage to look like a moron. Anyway, last time I didn't see you, I was talking about how the conference was going to be basically structured around speakers posing referendum questions. And I also had that really funny slideshow. Today, I want to talk about all the questions they posed or didn't. So instead of a slideshow, I have a Slido. But, I did put on a tie and I combed my hair and all that stuff. And speaking of the questions they didn't pose, one of the things that's come up at this conference, and I frequently find myself in these discussions, is that people say, we seem to be losing the policy arguments, we're losing the cultural struggle, and it's happening because conservatives tend to be fractious, and we have our own ideas and so on, whereas liberals seem to be very good at working in concert and even thinking in concert. And so we're often told that, conservatives need to learn to stick to the program and chant in unison, get out of their silos or whatever the cliche might be. And as one of those people who's hard to corral, I do want to say here that I don't agree with that. There are good and bad ways to be diverse. But conservatism isn't liberalism. And it isn't liberalism at a much deeper level than the disagreements we might have over the minimum wage or carbon taxes. Ironically, conservatism is a philosophy that values diversity and is tolerant of dissenting opinions, unlike the people who won't shut up about the stuff, except when they're trying to shut you up. And I agree that there are some tactical drawbacks to conservatives insisting on thinking for themselves, but there are also some very important strategic advantages. For one thing, we don't creep people out with this tendency to look like a cult. And for another thing, we don't get stuck with terrible ideas because nobody's allowed to say anything. Well, okay, we do from conservative parties. Boy, you can get some terrible ideas from them. But I'm not talking about political conservatism, which, as I think you have learned painfully, too often turns out to be liberalism, sometimes on purpose and sometimes not, but rarely successfully. What I'm talking about is basically that we told our speakers to frame your remarks around a question, and many of them didn't. So I went and did it anyway. And now we're going to look at those questions. And by the way, to avoid prejudicing the audience in favor of my questions or possibly against them, I submitted them anonymously, but I think I'm the only person who did, so that dodge kind of failed. Undaunted, as the schedule indicates, I'm supposed to talk at you for about 45 minutes about the questions, or maybe somewhat less than 45 minutes. You know, Abraham Lincoln once said about public speaking that the secret is be sincere, be brief, and be seated. I'm actually already sitting down, but I'm going to try and do the rest of it. And incidentally, back in Lincoln's day, you know, the Lincoln-Douglas debates attracted thousands of people from miles around at a time when they had to trudge through the dust or ride in some bumpy wagon over a dirt road. And there weren't even microphones. And they would stand around while he and Stephen Douglas debated who'd endorsed what part of some obscure bill 10 years earlier for hours. So, you know, those were the days when the audience would put up with almost anything. Mind you, there was no internet back then, so they didn't have a lot else to do, especially once they'd come there. They couldn't check their phone, which half of you are doing. So today is not the same, and I better stop joining and get to the point. And the point is that once I've finished with my yapping, what we're going to do is you're going to spend about 15 minutes voting on the questions that arose, directly or indirectly, from Friday's sessions, the morning session on Why Are We Here, Patrick Moore's excellent lunch talk, the afternoon session on Where Are We Going? And so I'll talk about, well, maybe my questions, maybe not. But in terms of Andrew Lawton's remarks, Paul Hinman's, Roger Hodkinson's, Michelle Sterling's, Rob Anders, Josh Anderson's, and Derek Sloan's as well, of course, as Patrick's. And then we'll get on to Maxime Bernier's and the stuff from today. I noticed, by the way, in looking at the Slido stuff, that many people have already voted, which is certainly in keeping with the spirit of the event. They didn't wait to be told to vote. But I understand that there are probably something like 150 people present in person or virtually, which means that many more people can vote than have, and I encourage you to do that. Those of you who haven't already done all your voting in the first batch anyway. Now, as to the questions themselves, they do overlap to some extent, as the subjects do, but I'm going to try and sort them out. And then, as you also know from the program, once the voting is done, Danny and I will offer some concluding thoughts on how we can do more than just gnash our teeth at what's going on. And let me mention here that many years ago, and it's funny how it keeps seeming to be more every year, I was a member of the Ottawa Citizen editorial board. And in those heady days, we had a rule that there were two editorials we would never allow ourselves to write in print. And one was Time Will Tell, and the other was, Isn't It Awful? Of course, time would tell, and it usually was awful, but our job was to be more helpful, and that is, again, true here. So the first thing I want to do is look through Slido for questions on the culture, on recall, on balanced budgets, on lockdowns, and I know there is one because I wrote it, also on carbon taxes, other environmental things, and the Alberta Police Force. And after that, we'll look at this sort of sweeping assertion of provincial jurisdiction that Maxime Bernier recommended, equalization, the question of whether Alberta should simply flat out separate, and also talk about tax collection. And by the way, here I'm going to use my privilege of being the speaker to take issue with one small thing that Danielle said about how the software makes it simple. I actually think if it weren't for the software, we would refuse to tolerate a tax code as ludicrously complicated as ours is. You could not, and by you I mean me and Danielle, could not do our own taxes with a pencil anymore. I don't even know that an accountant could do it with the software. You don't know what's happening. And frankly, sometimes the CRA, I've had the CRA phone me and say, well, we don't like this number and in your tax return. And I've said, it's what came out of TurboTax. And they go, oh, okay. And but we still don't like it. And I say, well, what do you think it ought to be? And they'll go, yeah, I don't know, maybe this. And I say, okay, if I put that down, are you happy? No, yeah, we'll be happy. And I do, but neither they nor I understand what we're doing anymore. But that's a minor point and also a digression. Now, in terms of the Slido questions, those of you who've been looking at them will be aware that some of them were actually questions intended for the speakers during the conference rather than intended for the referendum. Some of them were for the organizers about why can't we hear the speaker or what was that book. And I don't think we'll be putting some of those on the referendum in the fall. One of the organizational ones that I thought was a very good question was, can you vote no as well as yes? Or simply ignore something? And I'm afraid that I think the answer is that you can't, but the app would be better if you could. And that brings me to a kind of procedural thing. Because you can't actually vote no if you think a question is really awful, please do make an effort to vote yes on the ones that you think are good, to open a gap between them and the ones you think are indifferent and the ones you think are really bad. And speaking of questions that you think are really bad, if you see a question that you think is asking the right thing but in the wrong way, and should be reworded, go ahead and reword it and put it into the queue. And we'll count them together when we look at the voting. Including Tom Flanagan's point that he made to Danielle about tax points prompted me to write a question about tax points. But if I flubbed it, the professor can fail me, and then he can show how I should have completed the assignment if I wanted to get a decent grade. Also on the procedural point, as I said on Friday, we didn't have and we don't have a hard number for how many questions should make it to the referendum. My guess is that when we do the voting, what you're going to see is a kind of pattern emerge where there's a cluster up at the top of the questions that people really think are good. And then there'll be a cluster with a sort of moderate number of votes that some like and some don't. And then a cluster with very few. And if that is how it breaks down, I think we'll basically say that the top cluster are all successful candidates. If it's a continuum, we'll make up some procedure and tell you what was our plan all along. And if there are several versions of a question, which there certainly are with the Alberta police force, what we'll do is we'll count them all toward that general question, and then we'll pick the top individual vote getter from among them. Now, obviously, again, on the subject of Conservatives not being a cult, once you leave here, it won't matter what we or the people around you or the people like you ended up saying. You'll be free to push for some of them to go on the referendum and not others, or some version that nobody except you voted for because they didn't understand your wisdom. But I think we'll also get, and I think it will be useful to get, a fairly strong sense of what the kinds of things people like us wish that people like Jason Kenney would have to ask the people who inhabit the province of Alberta, and then listen to those answers. So let me get on to the subjects, because that is supposedly why I'm here. And I think I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to try and share the Slido screen. I don't know what's going to come up. That's not what I want to share. Hang on. There, I think. Are you seeing the Slido, or are you just seeing me again? That's no good. I would like to get the Slido questions up if I could figure out how to do it, and I do have them here. Let me try this again. It's always fun having technical difficulties in the middle of a speech. Okay, I'm going to share screen 2 and then switch what's on screen 2. There. Can you, I hope, now see the questions? Because I can see them. And as I say, when it comes to culture, you can't really vote on culture. Culture is not something government does. Politics is downstream of culture. You could say, let's have no subsidies for poets or something along those lines. But I am looking for a question that one clever person submitted, and I feel very positively toward this person because it was me. And that was the question, which is related to this one about guaranteeing rights and freedom. So that's not a referendum question. It's a good question, but it's not a referendum question about whether the Alberta government should repeal all restrictions, here we are, on free speech, other than laws against libel, sedition, and advocacy of violence. Because it seems to me that in terms of Andrew Lawton's presentation, one way to make it more possible to advocate for conservative ideas is to take away the fear of legal persecution if you should say something that somebody declares hurt their feelings. So I think that's a question that is worth considering in terms of not losing the cultural fight and therefore necessarily losing the policy fight. We also have questions about recall. Paul Hinman, as usual, was advocating for recall. And as I mentioned, I think a couple of years ago, I used to disagree with him, but he has convinced me over time. And so if there's not a question on whether it should be possible to recall politicians who break their promises, then there certainly ought to be such a question. There is or was a question about balancing budgets. There we are. Should Alberta be obliged by law to balance its budget every year? I think that would be a good question because I wrote it, but I invite your opinion on whether this is a good idea or not. And then we have this question. It's obvious that one of the sore points among this audience, and rightly so, and it's a sore point with me, is these lockdowns. The exceptionally draconian things that were done to us in an exceptionally sort of administratively snooty way without going to the legislature for any kind of debate or proper authorization, right? If you try and tell your MLA or your MP, well, I didn't think you should have done that, they'll say, I didn't do that. That was just the premier or the prime minister listening to them, the experts. And so you see, here's a comment from Gordon Miller about thanking Dr. Hodkinson, which is, of course, he should be thanked. But then what? Oh, by the way, on this one, we're not going to put a question on the referendum in the fall. Should we call the Prime Minister of Canada poop? We can do better than that, folks. So if you're voting for that one, don't take your vote back. That's not the adult in the room. But there was a question somewhere here, and now I can't find it. It's probably because it got a lot of votes, saying that it should not be possible for the government to override fundamental freedoms without holding a referendum. I'm having trouble finding that, but I know it's here somewhere. And see, here's a question. How do we make sure it can't happen? Well, this is one way to do it. Where I know this is here, and I'm not going to stop until I find it. It doesn't seem to have gotten a lot of votes, that's for sure. It's way down at the bottom. Well, you can go and find it if you think it's a good question. I don't seem to be able to locate it. So it didn't get a lot of votes, so I guess people didn't think it was a good question. But here we are. Should the Alberta government be prohibited from infringing citizens' rights to free association and mobility without a referendum? I happen to think that's a good question. If you don't think it's a good question, don't vote for it. We're not a cult. If you think it's a good question, vote for it. But it's one way of phrasing it. Maybe you can think of some other way of phrasing it. It seemed to me that was a good, clear, and constitutionally focused way, but there might be others. Could you set up a mic for the floor question? That is a good question, but we will not be putting that to the people of Alberta in the fall. Can't see Michelle is an unfortunate situation, but again, not suitable for a referendum. You see, there's a bunch of these. Can Andrew turn his mic on? And the answer to that one is yes. In fact, he can, or somebody can, things like that. But when it comes to carbon taxes, well, again, this is kind of an interesting problem. What's the referendum question that you would ask? If it were a federal referendum, you should say, should we get rid of the carbon tax? But if it's a provincial referendum, what can you ask? And one possibility here, which seems to be getting a lot of votes, is should Alberta demand that the federal carbon tax not apply to its residents? And there are various ways that you could then attempt to implement that if it passed. But you could certainly tell Jason Kenney, don't let them collect the money and keep it. And then it's up to you, sir, to figure out how to make sure that that will not happen. And then, of course, we have this question, should Alberta create a provincial police force? And then we get 52 votes on that. But you'll notice that there are other versions as well. Should Alberta have its own police force in reserve? 27. So you add that to the 52 there. And in point of fact, this idea might well be in first place with 91 votes. Oh, and 24 more, right? So we're at 115 if I can do math, which I once could. And then there was also the related question, which is down here somewhere. There's one about municipal police forces. But there was a question about the Alberta sheriffs. And I'm going to count that, I think, as part of the should it have its own police force. But I think it raises a kind of technical question. Is the sheriff's force large enough, or could it readily be expanded? And does the sheriff's force have some other particular and important function that it would be a mistake to combine? I didn't know that there were provincial sheriffs. I don't even know if there are in Ontario. They've never come to my door if there are. But those are kind of technical questions that pertain to exactly how to go about doing it if it passes the referendum. So that's all very interesting. And then we have, I think there are a number of possible questions here on another one about jurisdiction. And again, I tried to write something that captured the spirit of Maxime Bernier's talk. But you see, we also have this one here. Should Alberta enforce their constitutional right to control their resources? 56 votes. Now, that's just one area of jurisdiction, but it's an important one. I think there's some resource specifically that people probably have in mind, if I could just figure out what it is. But since I'm from Ontario, I don't know that kind of stuff at all. But there are also questions that are broader. Oh yeah, there's the sheriff question, and that one's got 13 votes. Provincial autonomy and taxation, policing, and social programs. That is another good way of asking it, because our Constitution, and this is one of the strange things here, our Constitution very clearly reserves both health and education to the provinces. There's no wiggle room there. It's not ambiguous. Actually, I love the one on welfare, because it refers to health, because it refers to eleemosynary institutions. And I think eleemosynary is a great word. It means charitable. But then it reserves marine hospitals. Apparently marine hospitals are federal, so the feds can keep marine hospitals. But the Canada Health Act is almost certainly unconstitutional. Whether a court would rule that, I don't know. But that's anyway. So that's another one that seems to me to be part of the vote on Maxime Bernier's question. And so here, this was an attempt to phrase his question. Should the Alberta government block all federal intrusions into provincial jurisdiction? And again, even if that were to pass, there might be some question of how they could do it. But if they were told you better do it, and they had a strong mandate to go to the federal government and say, the people have spoken, out you go. Don't enforce the Canada Health Act and don't penalize us for not enforcing it. And because education's provincial, I don't know why the federal government is giving money to universities. I don't even know how it's allowed to give money to universities. It's a very strange business. They've never tried to get into secondary or primary schools, but they've charged into post-secondary, which I think is really quite odd. And here's another version of the social program thing. So those are important questions. And then somewhere in here, oh yeah, there's the Department of Autonomy. Leon Craig couldn't be with us, but it's a good question. Should the government prepare for the possibility by looking at what you'd actually have to do, what you'd be able to do, and coming up with an honest assessment, both of the advantages and the drawbacks? Because if you ever find yourself in a situation where, for whatever reason, the province does vote for separation, either the legislature does it or the people do it, it's like having a mobilization plan. You want to know what it means. You want to know what you're going to do next. I don't know that the Quebec separatists ever did. And there are all kinds of tricky questions like division of assets. So it's certainly at least arguable that you ought to be ready for the problem and understand it better. Okay, here's another one on the encroachments, right? So that's there are several versions of that question, some more popular than others, but all helpful in thinking about what you should ask for and how you should ask for it. And again, let's not call him Trudeau. Okay, that's not helpful. That won't convince people that we're not idiots. So let's not do it. Again, here's a question for John Carpe. Good question, but not a not a referendum question. And there's the question about tax points. So again, Dr. Flanagan, if I muffed that, please fix it. More questions like about the being able to watch the presentations later. Good questions. Ask Danny. He will know the answer to that question. Somebody about wanting to adopt the Canadian Constitution for Alberta. And of course, you all know I did do a documentary on fixing Canada's Constitution where I proposed that the provinces should have constitutions. And since I've got the mic again, I'm going to plug that and mention that one of the things that I think is important to think about, if Alberta does end up having to go it alone, or if you've already decided it should, do you want a unitary state? That is, there's one parliament and then there are cities, or would you like Alberta to be a federation? Would you divide Alberta into provinces? And I'm a big decentralizer, so I'd say yes. I would say that if Alberta becomes a country, it should have subordinate jurisdictions with constitutions that include bills of rights. So that's not something that anybody has put on the Slido, but it is something to think about. If you're going to separate, what do you think good government would look like? And somewhere here, there is, I think, a question, basically, should Alberta separate? I know some of you actually think that Alberta should just separate. Okay, I don't know where that one's gone, but it's here somewhere. So some of you maybe just be fed up and say, yeah, we should just have a vote to separate. But of course, as you heard from Paul Hinman, it would not be a good idea, even if you want to separate, to hold that vote now and lose. So things to think about, though, again, you can vote yes, but you can't vote no. And then again, we have the questions on tax collection. We have cannot hear the question. I'm against that. I'm going to vote that down if I can. But yeah, how do you vote no? Excellent question, to which there is, alas, no answer. And somebody says, should the referendum say should Alberta, or should say Alberta should, yes or no? And yeah, I took the point. I didn't start changing the format, but I thought maybe, yeah, the referendum question should all just say Alberta should, and then there's a yes box and a no box. How do we get the under 40 involved? Beats me. I wish I was under 40, but that's not been the case for a while, and apparently it's not coming around again. So there you are. That doesn't cover all of the questions, and some of the questions, of course, are going to fall into more than one category, but they do, by and large, tend, it seems to me, to group around the various things that people have advocated in their presentations. And when we get to the voting section, if you look at your program, it actually says audience debate and vote. So there'll be some scope for people, if they think one of these questions is actually a terrible idea, disguised as a good idea, to stand up and very briefly, concisely, and without engaging in personalities, indicate why they think this really shouldn't happen, even though it might look as though it should happen. But I think that we've got a great set of questions. As you see, we're starting to get vote totals on the popular ones up towards 60. I think there are more people out there, and I think that people should continue voting. But I'm really pleased with the presentations. I'm really pleased with the questions. And now it's over to you to decide what you think are the best or most important questions. And I will now cease to prattle and leave you to carry out that work. I figured out how to stop sharing.
It wasn't. I asked David to put me on the screen for 1 second. I think we're all sort of learning as we go here, but as I understand it, that we can vote no if we set up a poll question. So I think what we should do as the discussion goes on, and let's just say the top four, the ones that have the four, the most likes, then we'll create them into a poll question, and then we can vote yes or no. Which, I mean, I guess if they've got to the top, maybe they're obviously going to win, but there may well be people who aren't bothered liking it. But I think we could create a poll question, and then we could vote, and we could say, look, 90% of the people voted yes on this poll question. So if, like, as I say, we're sort of learning as we go here, but I think that's one of our options for that. And as far as your question, like, how do we get the youth involved? I think I'll just answer that while I have the mic. And both Maxime and Derek touched on it in their speeches last night, and we call it telling the youth the truth. because to me, like mostly, like lots of them lied about their ages to go to war, and we trusted them to do that. And I mean, but then we lie to them, and then we wonder why they're, you know, disgruntled with us when they find out that we were lying to them. So I think the best thing that people like our organizations and leaders like Maxime and Derek, which they're already doing, is they can just trust them with their ability and tell them the truth, and then let them decide just the same way as we've decided things. So I mean, that's my little rant about telling the truth. But anyway, let's carry on
with the polls, right? Because maybe that one question gets 59 pluses and a bunch of people who are just thinking, yeah, whatever. And another one might get 59 pluses and have a bunch of people going, no, that's an awful idea. And so the poll would give us a way to determine if some of them divided people sharply, as opposed to merely attracting quite a bit of support and a fair amount of indifference.
Even if it's only like, you know, 55-4 or whatever, at least we'll know. But if it happens to be whatever, but we'll try that as it unfolds. So are you done? I didn't mean to cut you off. That was sort of the end of your comments.
I was sincere. I tried to be brief, and I am now seated.
Thank you very much. So let's just do this. Let's take the top two that you have, and if someone who's running the computer could create a poll, put the question in there, and then I guess the answer will be yes or no, and then we'll vote on the poll. So if everybody that isn't signed into Slido, if you do, I think it was 89972, wasn't it? Was that the Slido slide-in number? So get logged into your thing. And I thank you, those of you here and those of you at home, for bearing with us. I think John was right when he said, hopefully we can do this all in person in the future. But even when we're doing it in person in the future, there's always lots of people who like are interested but haven't got the time to be there. So if we can make this work reasonably efficiently, I think it's a good way of improving what we do in the discussion. It's all part of like, how do we reach out to people? So is somebody creating a poll question? I guess John's doing that. Go ahead, David.
Either John or I can do it right now.
Okay.
Danny, I just want to ask you, does everyone know what is going on here?
Well, I wouldn't bet the farm on that, but I think we're trying. Like,
there's a line from Treasure Island.
How many people here are signed into Slido? Like, how many are actually signed in? So yeah, okay, quite a few of us are signed in, and so then if you go to Slido.com, it'll say join an event, and then if you put in the 89972, and then there will be a spot where it says polls, and if one of us will create a poll. Are you working at creating a poll, John, by any chance?
I wouldn't have a clue how to create a poll. I'm hoping David knows.
Who knows?
But in terms of, does everybody know what's going on? There's a line in Treasure Island where one of the pirates says, I just wants to know what's what. And another one says, I'd be a lucky man as knowed that. So I
don't know if we have any lucky men here, but anyway, so David, do you want to create a poll? You create a poll with the number one question that was at the top. What's the number one question at the top, John? And then or do you want to create the poll, John? Or
I don't know how to create a poll.
You might not be able to, because David might be the administrator. You create the poll, okay?
And I'm going to show on the screen right now what the top question vote getting is. So if you go to that website, you'll see under the questions, you can actually hit the thumbs up, and everyone has been doing that. So we see 63 people have voted on the RCMP or our Alberta Police Force. But then there are poll questions only when we turn them on. So they're not on yet.
Okay.
And we can just do one at a time.
Yeah, sure. So let's do a poll question. Should Alberta create its own provincial police force?
Okay, now I think we did that, didn't we, yesterday?
I think we
did, and we already had 58 votes, and I think people have already voted on that.
Okay, well, let's create another one.
Now, just so you know, we have a bunch that I think you created, Danny.
Yes, and John did some
of them. Or John did too.
Yeah. What about that one? Should property rights be guaranteed by law?
Did you want it? Well,
or how about this one? Like how many? How about this? Since Maxime has made an effort to be here, like how many people are going to support Maxime Bernier because he's going to radically decentralize government? Well, there'd be a good poll, wouldn't it? You won't even have to pay us, Maxime. We'll just do a poll right here, right now. So let's do that. Can you do that one? Just put how many people like agree with Maxime Bernier's idea to radically decentralize government, and then we'll know. I mean, at the end of the day, Jason Kenney's probably not going to listen to our suggestions anyways, but we might as well let him know what we're thinking. Real time, here we are.
Okay, so on your app or well, on the phone or computer, this should show up now. And now we can see in real time everyone voting.
Here we are. That's our plan. That's our plan.
We understand there's a leadership race about to come up.
There we go. See, that's how a poll works. And we have, as we like when we were practicing this, you could only do 3 polls, but we actually have a paid function, and just for the fun, we can do we have unlimited polls today, and we have. Let's do one more. How many people watching online would support Derek Sloan joining Maxime Bernier's party to help him radically decentralize? There we are. Yeah, you can vote. You don't have to abstain, Maxime. I know you've got a conflict of interest, but you don't have to abstain. This is not a scientific poll. So let's do that one just for fun, and then we'll get back to the list of our. Go ahead, Maxime. Yes, yes, exactly. We'll screenshot and send to Derek and say this is what came up when we voted on this. Yes.
Okay, so is this good enough? Would you support Derek Sloan joining the PPC?
Yes.
Okay, so here it comes up in a second. All right, this should be available now to vote.
Okay, we can vote.
It's a race.
Well, no, it's nice to see that we've got a few federal conservatives watching the show. So thank you very much for joining us, federal conservatives, and thank you. But let's be fair to our federal conservatives. Some of them who are or were really dear friends of mine. But I mean, in all fairness, we're in a difficult spot, and if I have to choose between my grandchildren and my federal conservative friends. Like, I'm sorry to my federal conservative friends, I'm picking my goldarn grandchildren. So thank you very much. Yes, but here's a question for all the federal conservatives watching here in Alberta. How many of you people watching our conference online would support your federal conservative MP, like joining Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada, so they could better represent the people in their constituency? Well, there's another question. The question was, what if we don't want our federal conservative guy? Well, help me out here, girl.
Is that really a question you want me to?
That's the question. Let's do that.
Okay, tell me again.
How many people here would support their federal conservative MP joining Maxime Bernier's party so that they could better represent Alberta rather than be muzzled by Aaron O'Toole and his commitment to the Paris Agreement, which is a nail in the coffin of Alberta's energy industry and our economy. Did you get all that there? Did you get all that? It's like the referendum question. It's 2 minutes long. Yeah. Yes.
How many people would support their Conservative Party to cross over to the PPC?
That's what I'm saying. Okay, you got that, David?
No. What?
How many would support their federal conservative candidate crossing over to join the People's Party of Canada?
Okay, how about this?
Question? Okay, here.
How many would support your federal MP crossing the floor to join Maxime's PPC?
That's it. Okay, let's see. Now this might be interesting because. Here we are. Let's see what this one.
All right, hit save, and here we go.
Here we are. Okay, here we are. Well, no, there we are. That's a pretty good, you could win an election with 74%, can't you, Maxime? Yes, exactly. Yeah. And one of the reasons that we charged $50 for the folks at home, we said, the NDP might want to troll us, but if they're going to troll us, they're going to have to pay to do it. So anyway, yeah, I think we've got some pretty sincere people watching us online. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to some of our serious questions.
There's some previous questions that you might have created and that we just talked about. Danielle talked about. So let me put this up here. Do you support the Alberta government in collecting all the taxes being paid in Alberta?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Let's vote on that one. Holy smokes. Well, we're not being trolled by the NDP, I can tell you that. Okay, well, let's get Paul's referendum, your recall.
Recall, okay. We'll do recall now. 100%.
100%, okay.
Okay.
Do we have a recall question there, or do we want you to? There we are. Do you want to be able to hold your elected officials through recall? Let me vote too. Holy smokes. There we are. Who said no? Who's elected here in the room? We must have an MP watching online, but my apologies to people watching online. Yeah.
We have a multiple choice question.
Okay, let's do them all.
Fun to even just do because there's more than just two choices.
Yeah, let's do that.
So let's do this one here. Okay. This is going to be popular. What is your opinion about the lockdowns?
Okay, you can vote on. Okay, click on which one. Okay.
You should have had a question. Lockdown should have never been allowed.
Well, we can't go back, but we could end them yesterday. How about that? So if you don't, okay, if they should have been ended yesterday, they should have been ended the day before they were announced. Yeah. There we are.
We're probably about done.
Has anybody got Jason Kenney's? I've still got his cell number. Maybe I should text this screen to him. He doesn't answer anyway, so I won't bother. But anyway, we can text it to him, see what he says. Exactly. Okay. Now, we're sort of getting, I guess we're getting the feeling of how we can vote and the feeling of how the meetings. So, John, I think we've done pretty well. I mean, I feel like, where do you suggest we go from here? I think we've got to, is there anyone opposed? I think the recall thing is probably as important a question as we have here. No, let's do a balanced budget one. Have you got a balanced budget one there?
What did I say? Well, I think there's one in the queue, isn't there?
Well, it's hard for him to find them because the queue is so long. So if he can just write. No, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, should the government be required to balance its budget? The real question is if they go over, then the taxes go up the next year. By constitution, that's not good enough. The government be constitutionally
Did you want me to add the constitutional part, or should we make it simple?
Yeah.
Put the Constitution in there because that's
Okay. Should the government be required constitutionally?
No, yeah, right.
Okay, here we go. Oh. Let me share this screen here. There we go. I would like to do one interesting little, it's a poll, but it'll be kind of cool on the screen. So
sure, and
after I finish this,
I'd also like to do a question where we might get a no, just so we're sure, David, you're not just fixing these polls like the preset numbers. So let's so here you do our fun question. And
do you think this would be the last EEA conference?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, do you think that'll be after your question? You know what? I don't, but Pat would. So we'll see how everybody votes. I don't have to do much work. I just get to stand up here. Yeah.
Okay, so this question here, you can only use one word to answer it. With one word answer, how do you feel about this year's conference? With one word, and then it's going to make a neat little thing on the screen. So go for it. And if you say the same word, it will make it bigger or smaller, and so that's why it's kind of interesting. So did you want to ask the question, should we do this again?
Well,
in Danny's backyard?
I think I think it's fairly, it looks hopeful and great and awesome, and my vote hasn't been recorded there yet, but anyway, it's good. Let's think of another question that might give us a no answer. Oh, I will be voting UCP in the next election. How about that? Let's try that one. I will be voting UCP in the next election. Let's see. We're having fun now. What the heck? That's a good question. Just like we'll.
Okay, here comes the next question.
Here we go. Here, Judgment Day.
I see Danny voted yes.
Yeah, right. That's probably Pat. Anyway, here we go.
Though that's probably a trick question.
You know they're at home watching, because I don't think there's anybody in the room that's thinking that. But anyway, that's great. Okay, now.
Well, I can't vote, not that I would
What
anyway.
what about the question? Is there any, like, you've all sort of got a sense of the questions that we want to put on the referendum, and I think, is it fair to say, like, Paul, do you want to just say a little bit about recall? Like, I'd like to have the recall on the referendum, but Paul, let me tell you what Paul always says, and then he can come up here and tell you again. No, go ahead, Paul.
I was gonna say, you always love to say what I'm gonna say, and you usually say it better than I say it, so I should probably let you say it. When I first ran, I just felt that the reason why I had to run was because there was nobody I wanted to vote for. And it just literally, it's like, this is crazy. And so I entered into a race. We were below 3% in the polls, and everybody says that, it's impossible. Why are you doing this? And it says, because I want to be able to vote for somebody. I've always liked the idea that on the voting ballot, there should be none of the above. And if somebody doesn't, if none of the above scores higher than the other one, and that's the first past the gate, then there'd be no MLA or MP or municipal person or someone on the school board. But we never had that, and it's something that I would seriously consider is none of the above in an election. So people actually, if they don't like any of them, they say no, and we wouldn't have any of them. But when I went door to door, one of the first questions that I asked was, do you think it makes any difference who gets elected in government? How many of you, what's your answer to that? How many would say it makes no difference who gets elected in government? They all go down there, they all start, they become, I always say, are you going down there to be part of government and part of the problems, or are you going down there to fix government and fix the problems? And I always said, I'm going up there to fix the problems, not to become one of the problems. And so I'd ask them that, and most people would say, no, you guys are all the same. Once you get in there, you're just corrupted, this and that. And I says, well, I would agree with you that that's been my history, but Paul Hinman's different. I'm here at the door, and I'm telling you that if you're not happy with me, and again, back then, I don't know, I think that there was only like 12,000 votes on average down in Cardston Moore. And I says, if 6,000 people sign a petition that they feel I'm not a good elected representative, I'll step down. You can have a by-election. I says, can you do that with anybody else? And I don't know if that's why I won, because I knocked on a lot of doors, but that was my promise to them, is that if you're not happy with me, they don't have to have any legislation. I mean, it's my word, my honor, that you gather 6,000 signatures from registered voters, I'll step down and you'll have a by-election. I might still run again, but you can fire me. And I did that again my second time in Calgary Glenmore. It's one of my big things. And again, when I was running against a city alderman that was a shoo-in, supposed to win and going for Stelmach, but she really got hammered when they asked her the questions, well, who are you going to represent when you're elected? You know, the people or the premier? And she says, well, like, if you understand the party whip and everything else, it's going to be the premier. But I just feel the two biggest problems with democracy, and again, when you talk constitutional democracy or republic or whatever else, that the two biggest problems we have is, one, no accountability. Everybody knows and understands once these people are elected, it's 4 years before we can do anything. The ballot question is just on 4 people's names or 3 people's names. It's never on issues. We don't have a referendum with 2377 questions like California. And when they get elected, they all are just absolutely convinced that every wacky idea they've ever had in their head is now a mandate for what they're going to do up there. And there's just no accountability. And that's why the power to me should reside in the people 24/7, that if an elected representative has done something that you don't agree with, you can go out and start collecting signatures to fire them. And if you're right, it's amazing how fast you can collect signatures. But if you're offside, all of a sudden you start to realize and you're calmed down that, well, I guess that, I'm one of the ones that's upset, but other people don't care that our taxes went up 3% this year. And so that to me is a great calming effect. And the other one, which again I talked about, is this idea of buying votes with future people's money. All these political slush funds that Danielle talked about, that our system is run on political slush funds. The governments collect the money and then they put it out with, all of their different grants and promises and these ideas that they have. And so if we have recall and you have to balance your budget every year and taxes go up and, like Justin's original one, budgets balance themselves. Well, they do if the taxes have to go up, and we had to pay that first $10 billion that turned into, I think, $30 billion. But anyways, if I'm successful and be elected as the leader, the elected leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party, one of the things that I'll be putting to our people is that our promise will be, whether or not we're able to form government, that we will be accountable to the people. Every person that's elected as a Wild Rose Independence MLA would be accountable to the people, and I just use the simple number of 50% plus 1 of the total number of votes. If 20,000 people voted, then you need 10,001 signatures to fire that elected representative. But it's registered voters. If you didn't register, you don't get to sign the petition. And again, Elections Alberta scrutinizes and goes through all of that. But I just think accountability of the money and accountability of the elected person is critical and would change where we'd actually have a constitutional democracy that actually is representative of the people. And the most important thing is that we can stop government in its tracks. I don't think that Jason would have perpetuated the lockdown if we had recall. Usually, and that's the other interesting thing, they say all you need to do is just shoot one person, everybody falls in line, and it's the same. You fire one MLA, and all of a sudden the whole dynamics of everything changes. But when there's nothing we can do, there's nothing that's happening. But anyways, that's my quick pitch on recall and balanced budgets.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, as you know, when Danielle asked you to run in Calgary Glenmore, Paul, I told me this story, but he said, I'm tired of it. I don't want to bother. And she said, well, it's only for 6 weeks. She said, because you're not going to win anyway. It's been a PC riding since 1969. So if you could just help us out for 6 weeks, then you could go back to your happy life, happy wife. But silly him. He went and promised that, and then they elected him. So, Milan, do you have a question? I'm not surprised. Good. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just got a comment first. Milan already has all the answers. That's why he doesn't ever ask questions.
Yeah, that's right.
There is a serious problem with the recall because it's asking for responsibility of the politicians, but never about responsibility of the voters. What about electorate? When electorate is going to pay for their mistake of voting wrong? When that happens? Electorate always demand more from their politicians. It's not only politicians who are guilty. Politicians spread the goodies for money of others only because electorate demands it. Electorate has to learn to pay for their wrong decisions. That means if he's there for 4 years, they won't find that he's bad guy 6 months later. They find that 2 years, 3 years later. Well, enjoy another year of that. Be punished. Without punishment, there is no change. Basically, it only enforces the rule of mob. Politicians will never do what is right, because sometimes the leader has to do what is right, not what electorate demands. Electorate demands freebies. Politician has to say, no, sorry, I cannot give it to you. I'm not going to steal from Johnny to give it to you. You don't deserve it. That's the right moral thing to do. You see? Yet you're forcing him because he knows. If he doesn't do it, he's finished, he's toast. It's over for him. You lost the good man, good leader, because he didn't please you. And who is the guilty side? Him or you? Would you like to look into mirror for change? Evidently, nobody liked to do that. Right?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
So, if he doesn't do it, he is toast.
Can I
The
answer that? then?
electorate will never learn to be responsible for their choices.
Thank you, Milan.
And that's why I always bring up two things, that if they want to promise and answer those people who want all those gifts, the next year the taxes go up. There's a difference between our system where they can promise and our deficit goes up versus if next year our taxes go up 5% or 7% or 20%, like this year, what's our taxes going to have to go up with what our provincial and our federal government has spent? If they were constitutionally bound and all of a sudden had to double our taxes for next year and we had recall, it's a double one. I agree. If you don't have to balance your budget, you're right. They can promise away and they can kick the can down the road year after year. It's what we've seen. And we're now $1 trillion, federally and over 100 billion provincially. But if you have to balance your budgets, that is the accountability. But again, I can't remember whether it was George Washington or Benjamin Franklin when he came out of the constitutional thing in Pennsylvania. They says, what do we have? A republic, if you can keep it. And the whole part of society is if the moral majority of the people are corrupt and want to live off of other people's sweat equity and stuff, it all collapses. Society does collapse if you're not morally accountable as individuals.
No, that's good. Yeah. Okay. But yeah.
That's why you have to raise the taxes. People are naturally immoral. If you like it or not, we are naturally immoral. Hence, we will always demand more, and we don't worry. The takers never worry what will be next year, because makers will have to pay those taxes. See?
We agree
The
with
mob
you.
always prevail. So we will go that's what got us here. That's why we're in this room. Because we constantly promising, constantly raising taxes, and republic or whatever supposedly constitutional monarchy just collapsed. We ran out of the money. It's over. Precisely because of this system. Because we cannot keep republic. We are inherently incapable unless you have a strong moral leaders who would enforce it.
Fair,
So
yeah.
recall will never work.
fair
You're
enough.
getting more into the same.
Despite which,
Fair-
not to
fair
sound
enough.
I speak, I have put a question in now. There is a question
There's a
about
whole list of things that may never work, but I mean, we basically have two choices. We have to try and figure out something that will work, or be prepared for the collapse that, I guess, who knows? We're there. I did an interview with Stuart McNish from Conversations That Matter. I think he talked to you as well, Paul. But I said, the only good news is that things are so bad that more people are starting to pay attention to it. So at least we've got more people's attention. So let's do the best we can with what we've got. I said, we either have to vote our way out of this mess or we have to fight our way out of it. And I'm too old to fight. So I'm for the let's vote our way out of it if we possibly can side. So how are we doing here for questions? Have we got another question? Or John just sent me a text and he said he thought we should, he said before the last segment, we should try to do a rough tally of the various multiple question options. I think the police are doing very well under 4 or 5 different versions. So I think it's fair to say that having our own police force should probably be one of the questions that we push to have on the referendum.
Yeah, I have can you hear me?
Yes.
I've got a rough running tally right now, and the Alberta Police Force in its various forms is in front with 161 votes. The need to protect provincial jurisdiction, various sort of different takes on it, is at 142. And then the Alberta Pension Plan versus the CPP is actually in third place at 93. And then fourth to 78 votes is for not having the carbon tax and getting out of Paris and so on. And then there are a number of things: balanced budgets, fixed equalization, collecting our own taxes, property rights are in the 50 to 70 range. So so there are 2 that are over 100. That's the police force and protecting provincial jurisdiction. And then having your own pension plan is definitely in third place with a fairly big lead over getting rid of carbon taxes, which is in fourth.
Could I suggest another question, which I hadn't got around to submitting it. It's actually Leon Craig's question, and he suggested it at the last conference. And he said that the government should have a department of independence, so that we had somebody working, or we could call it a department of autonomy, if you like, that someone was actually working away at developing some of the answers to some of these questions. Like over the course of the week, do you want to put up that the Alberta government should create a department of independence or a department of autonomy? But
It's only got 9 votes, though.
Well, maybe I could pitch for it then, because the point he was making is, like, somebody called me and said, well, what would we use? Would we use our own dollar? What would we use for security? And then what was the question, AJ, that you were asking me earlier? And I said, well, Orville, you actually asked me, you said, well, how much would we save if we kept the money here, if we did it all ourselves? And I said, we're basically senior citizens using part of our pension check to try and figure this out, and we're fighting against a multi-billion-dollar system that doesn't want it to happen. But if we had a department of autonomy, they should be creating that information just because it was good business, just to know, well, okay, it's a good deal or it's not a good deal. Whether they decide to do it or not, they should be doing it. So I'd like to ask everybody to go to that question about we should have a department of autonomy. We can certainly use that more than we need a department of culture, if just to pick on one.
Okay,
Well, I know, yeah, but we just need this department.
should we put it to the people?
Well, let's put it to the people. Let's put it to the people, and then we'll vote again. Let's vote on it, because,
Okay.
well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Let me get signed in so I get to vote for myself.
Speaking of voting, there's
Is the
another
come
question
up
we
yet?
have.
No, my
Oh.
that question has, there, it just showed up on mine. There we are. Okay. Well, thank you, folks. Like, our next conference, if you want to get a hold of me, I can give you 10% off for voting for what I like. So that's but anyway, but the point is, okay, John, sorry to jump into that, but it's something that we need to think about, sort of this. I think, Paul, this sort of goes along with your theme with doing our homework. This is, to me, isn't it part of doing our homework? And
It is, but again, our own government, the ministries that you have, can look and see what we need to do. We don't need another department.
yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
Who's going to run our new country? What are those departments? They got to figure out what we need.
Okay. Well, I was hoping they'd get started figuring it out before you got there. But anyway, no, I know, that's what I mean. I thought, but if we had it on, but anyway, fair enough. Okay. Well, okay. That's not the truth. Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, so where are we at, John or David, or Paul? I mean, I think, it seems like it seems to me we're getting a pretty clear idea on 4 or 5 questions. I think they're pretty good, logical questions. Are you still there, John, somewhere? Like, how about if we,
Yeah, I think maybe we take a break and then you and I do our wrap-up speech, because I think people have got the voting figured out, and I think we're getting the voice of the people.
Does anybody want to make a comment on what John just said? How about if we take a break, and then John and I'll make a few closing comments, and then we'll say, yeah, this is what we'll sort of make a list of things we're going to try and push forward with, and we'll go from there. And a couple of people last night came to me and said, I wish you'd had a little bit more question and answer with Maxime and Paul. And so if anybody that has a question they'd like to ask them, come and ask me at coffee time, and we'll ask them before we start anything else. But we've got Maxime has taken the time to be here. Of course, Paul's here. Derek Sloan and them had some meetings in Saskatoon, so they had to take off. But since Maxime has taken the time to be here, this would be we might as well ask him now as having to email him or something in the future. So if anybody has a question for him, and as I said at the back there's a book we're going to give Maxime when he leaves. But if you'd like to put a note in thanking him for taking the time, he's obviously a busy man as well, and it's pretty nice of him to have spent a couple of days here with us. So thank you, Maxime. So let's take a break, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, John. Should I phone you, John, and just talk to you for a minute about where we go, or?
You're okay.
I'll call you. Okay, thanks. In this area here? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, the best way.
I know you've done an enormous amount of work to make this thing happen. Ready? Gotta go. Great job. Great job. Thanks for telling us that global warming is shit. But you can't tell these people. I'll tell you a little story if you want. When Natalie was 3 years, her secretary was my patient, so I had her private life. I said, let him go. Change secretary. So tell Jason to arrest Greta Thunberg and her father, him for child molesting, and her for interfering with our election, and don't let them go until they don't confess who paid them. That's what Tides Foundation said. Usually American oil money, but do you know Tom Harris? The International Climate Science Coalition. He's my friend for 40-some years. I hadn't seen him until I said him overseas. I said, you can't be cheaper than John Harris. There it was. We had this whole lake together. He was brought in as an engineer to figure out the stall on the F5. what I said. You just it's a slam dunk. You don't need committees. They need to take action. You don't want paralysis by analysis. Just get a petition for everybody to sign it. And if you go to your grocery store, if you don't sign it, I'm not buying it. You go to your barber, you don't sign it, I'm not. You get good pressure. Well, either you got a choice. You got a petition, or you got a gun. That's the only choices you have. But they're not playing by the rules. Well, Milan says it's coming, whether you like it or not. That's how Hitler got major unemployment. And then it was somebody who was starving. It's a communist country. So did you see the joke on the internet? Biden wanted a missile attack in Syria. So funny, everybody put the color Black Lives Matter. Oh, Brown too. He said he was president. Black Lives Matter. But he said, well, not Black Lives Matter. Burning down. Did you ever hear this from the kids? Lots of kids. She got taken down. She was high up in the American government on housing. And she was a big business in New York City. And she said, the Black Lives Matter took out the black businesses out of the main, where the black people had businesses. They destroyed those. And so the Bezos or somebody could come and buy 10 cents on it. It was organized to steal these poor black businesses. Like it's there's special zones when you buy this grand building. So you no. What do you think? You got your my daughter got so that's her background. But anyway, you're being
One minute. Let's go. We're just about done. If everybody will sit down, we'll be done in a couple of minutes. So just give us a few, let's get started. Okay, folks. Okay, Todd Brown, time to get out your restricted weapon. Rob Anders. Todd Brown. Let's go. Yeah. Paul Nemechek. Yeah, absolutely. Daryl and Leanne, you can tell the smokers are all coming back in. That's right. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Let's we're just about at the end of our agenda, but now did Maxime slip out of the room, or is Maxime still? Oh, he's right here. Okay, good. We actually had is everybody yeah, he's here. Good. Yeah, thank you. Rick Northey, we're gonna rescind your membership if you don't sit down. There we are. Thank you very much. That's good. Bill Jones, yeah, everybody's got to sit down. Hello. Todd Brown, you can't stand and listen. You got to sit and listen. Okay, that's good. Okay, we're just about done. So let's bear with it. There was a few questions for Maxime, and I thought rather than me like asking him then him answering, we've just given him about 10 minutes to answer some of the questions that he's been asked since he spoke last night. So Maxime, just come and join us one more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Danny. Yes, thank you, everybody. I'll be short. Just, I had a question about pipelines yesterday night, and I just want to let you know that it's part of the platform of the People's Party of Canada to be able to build pipelines. And I'm very disappointed because I'm looking at the Conservative Party of Canada, and they don't have the courage to tell you that it's feasible to have pipelines across this country. Because, like I said yesterday, we believe in a radical decentralization, but at the same time, we believe when the federal government has the power to do something, must use it. And for pipeline, if you read our Constitution, Section 9210, it's under the federal jurisdiction to be able to build national infrastructures. A pipeline, it's a national infrastructure. So that's easy to do. The way you do it, you pass a legislation, you say this pipeline, like Energy S, it's for the national interest of our country. And doing that, you have, when I'm saying you, the federal government has the full jurisdiction. So you don't have to do any consultation with Quebec or with other provinces. You just do it, and you'll be able to build pipelines across this country. That's a solution that is in our Constitution. But we are the only political party at the federal level that is speaking about that. So, and people are telling Maxime, okay, that's good, but what about Quebec? You know, that will make a big debate over there if you impose a pipeline. It won't. The Quebec government is against that. But the population in Quebec, they know that. They know that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines than by train. Do you remember the Lac Mégantic tragedy? So Quebecers know that. It is safer for the population, but it is safer also for the environment. And we're in 2021. We can build a pipeline with the best technology. And we have pipeline actually downtown Montreal. All the gas for the airplanes that it's coming from the port of Montreal to Pierre-Elliott Trudeau Airport, it's by pipelines under Montreal. My God. You know, just in the middle of the center of the city. It's safe. And you just have to explain that to Quebecers and they will understand. But the Quebec government is playing the game with the radical environmentalists. So use the Constitution, inform the population, and everybody will know that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines than by train or by trucks. That's the best way to do it. So that's something that is doable, and that will be the solution for the prosperity of our country and also for the unity of our country, because I understand your point of view about that. The other point is equalization. I think Dr. Flanagan had a good discussion about that. Yes, you are giving money to Quebec. I just want to, Quebec received a lot of money from the equalization. Since the creation of that equalization formula, since 1957, Quebec is a poor province. Do you think really that Quebecers think that they're a poor province? In their mind, no, they're not. And Mr. Flanagan said that we had a surplus 2 budgets ago in Quebec. We are a poor province because of the formula, the way you calculate all that. Hydroelectricity, the energy coming from hydroelectricity versus the energy coming from oil and gas. The energy coming from oil and gas, it is part of the equalization formula. That's why you are rich here in Alberta. But the energy coming from hydroelectricity, it is not. So doing that, Quebec has no incentive to develop their own natural resources. For example, shale gas. We have a lot of shale gas in Quebec, but there's a moratorium on the development of shale gas. Why? First of all, because the Quebec government listened the radical environmentalists on that. But second, if we develop our shale gas industry in Quebec, we'll be richer and we won't have equalization money. So the politicians at the provincial level prefer to receive the money from Ottawa, and by the way, coming a little bit from Alberta, instead of developing their own natural resources. I'll give you another example. I was in New Brunswick. New Brunswick, by the way, that's the province that they receive the most money coming from the equalization per capita. It's not Quebec, it's New Brunswick. So I had a discussion with Mr. Irving, and he said, Maxime, I like your idea on equalization. And I'll give you an example. I want to develop natural gas here in New Brunswick. There's a lot of natural gas, but there's a moratorium on that. I cannot do it. So what I have to do, I have to import my natural gas from Alberta. And it's okay, I'm importing that from Alberta, but I have some in my, just here, I cannot develop that, but my people in my province are paying a little bit more for the transportation and all that. But my government doesn't want us to develop natural gas resources because they will receive less equalization money. So there's a way to speak about that and to explain that to Canadians, that that's an incentive for provinces to have bad economic policies. And let's have that debate. And by the way, there's a good news about it, and Mr. Flanagan said it. Everybody will be poor. Alberta will be poor. You see the graph. You were giving a lot of money to other provinces, but now because of the economy and the situation here, you are and we are in a recession. So you're going to be poor like Alberta, like Quebec. And what is the goal of an equalization formula? The goal is to, and it is in the Constitution, the goal is to be sure that every province will be able to offer the same level of public services to their citizens. So it's kind to be equal. Everybody must be able to have the same kind of public services from their provincial government. But because now every province will be poorer, so it will be easier to have a discussion about the equalization formula. You won't be able to give all these $1 billion to Quebec, and you are at the same level right now. But the problem with the formula, it's looking back 3 years ago, not today. So in 2 years, when we'll have the discussion about the equalization, the number will be different. You won't be able to give all that money because the formula is going back 3 years. So we'll have a real discussion. And I think it's time to explain that. But if you have a federal government that is serious about changing that, the beauty of that, you don't need to have, you have the obligation in the Constitution to have an equalization formula. That's in the Constitution. But the formula is not in the Constitution. You can give $1 million to provinces, and that will be your formula instead of $50 billion. You can decide. And by the way, the beauty of that, it's under the federal government. You don't need to do consultation about the new formula. You can have a cabinet meeting. Usually in Ottawa, the cabinet meeting are the Wednesday morning from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and you have a breakfast at the same time, and you have all the ministers around the table, and you have your discussion. For the formula, you can start the discussion about the equalization formula at 9 o'clock, having an agreement at 10 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock, the formula will be in force. You don't need to pass a legislation in from the federal parliament, in parliament. You just need to have a decision from the cabinet, and you don't need to do all these consultations. By the way, Prime Minister Harper changed the formula to be more generous toward Quebec, because at that time, he wanted to have more support in Quebec. So he did it, and he did it by a cabinet decision. That's it. And he changed the formula, and we did the announcement in a budget. So you can change it without having all these consultations. And also, Mr. Flanagan was right. About maybe 10 economists in this country understand the formula. It's so complicated. So what we must do, you must be able to understand the formula. It must be easy. We want to help poor province, but at the same time, we want to give them the right incentive to develop their own natural resources. And that's why we need to give less money to provinces. So I'll finish up on the equalization with an anecdote during the last campaign. I was in New Brunswick. I did a rally during that campaign, and I spoke about the equalization formula. And I'm coming from Quebec. It's a poor province, so I can speak against the equalization. And in New Brunswick, I said the same thing that I just told you. So a journalist from CBC was there following me, and oh my God, that's great. And so I asked for having an interview with the CBC when I was there to have more visibility. No, we won't speak with you, Bernier, and blah, blah, blah. It's okay. I did my rally. But the journalist came to me just after the rally, and she said, Mr. Bernier, I'm with CBC. Every morning at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, I'm there, and it's the biggest news show in the morning. I want you to be on my show, but I have just 4 minutes tomorrow live. Do you want to come? I said, yeah, what an opportunity. I said, yes. So came there, 6:45, ready, a little bit stressed, it's live, okay. And she didn't tell me what will be the subject. She just said, I will ask you a question about what you said yesterday at your rally. I said, okay, that's fair. So I didn't have any question in advance. Be there, the mic and everything. Do you have a glass of water? Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, live. Oh, Mr. Bernier, you're in here. Did you had a good rally yesterday? Yes. I think that you spoke about the equalization formula. I said, yes. What did you say about that? I said, you must change the formula and be less generous because that would be fair for every provinces. She said, yes. Do you know that New Brunswick received a lot of money from the equalization? I said, yes. Per capita, you're the province who received the most money coming from the equalization. Mr. Bernier, do you know that half of our budget in New Brunswick, it's coming from the equalization money? I said, yes, I know that. So, Mr. Bernier, you want to cut half of our budget and you want to have some support here in New Brunswick? I said, yes. I said, yes, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because you have a lot of natural resources here, and I think that's time to be able to exploit that. And I think your people are rich people, and they want to participate in that confederation. And I'll tell you, I won't do that tomorrow. We'll have a phase out, and we'll give you some time to adjust your budget, but we'll do it. But at the same time, I'm not the only one who said that. You're the leader of the Conservative, the new leader of the Conservative Party said that he's not proud to be from New Brunswick because it's a poor province. And he said, we must do something about the equalization. So I think we'll be able to have an agreement with you and your people. And I want you to be richer, like I want Quebecers. I know that Quebecers receive a lot of money. So yes, and I think I will have support because I think your people are intelligent. And they know that it's not fair for Alberta, it's not fair for Quebec, it's not fair for you. You need to change the formula, and nobody understands that formula. So let's have a national discussion on that. And I thank you for asking me that question. It's so important. So we need to do that. It's doable. People will understand that. So I think there's a bright future for you, Albertan. Yeah, the times are very tough, but if you have all the tools, and like Paul just said, have a government that will do everything to control your own destiny. And people across the country will look at you, oh, what happened there? And, they will listen a little bit more about what we have to say. So I strongly believe that you have a strong future. And yes, times are tough, but when you have tough time like that, it's time to have a vision. It's time to believe in something, to believe in us. And I know that you believe in yourself, and we at the PPC believe in you. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Maxime. Thank you, Maxime. Excellent. Okay. So now we're back to I think we're back to, John, are you still somewhere there on virtual land?
I'm here in virtual land. I still exist.
There we are, and we can hear you. And John, why don't you?
Halo.
Okay, there we are. So you've looked at the questions. Why don't you make some concluding remarks? I think we're at the spot in the agenda where I think it says audience is falling asleep. John, you get to speak. Yes. Okay, so here's your challenge, John. Like you're there, you're wide awake. It's
Time
late.
to wake people up with some statistical analysis. I know I have been doing a running tally. Somebody asked where this was coming from, and basically I was trying to keep track of how the questions were turning out. And I'll quickly say what I think I found, but of course, you guys can go and look at it for yourselves. You don't have to believe me. The question about protecting provincial jurisdiction, and there were about 9 questions on that one, and the question on the Alberta Police Force, and I thought there were 4, are way out in front. 175 and 164, and then Alberta pension plans at 95, carbon taxes, tax collection, property rights are all in the 70s, and after that it tapers off. So that seems to be where people feel strongly about these things. Paul will be glad to hear that the vote for immediate separation got 4 votes, so apparently that's not on. But rather than dwelling on that, I want to say, first of all, thank you all for coming. I think it's been a great conference. I think it's been fun working with the Slido app, and otherwise we wouldn't have a sense among these questions of which ones had really resonated with the people at the conference, that we might have a feeling based on the smoothness of my rhetoric or the loudness of somebody's presentation. But this way we've actually had a chance to check this out, and I think that's been quite constructive. And I think that it also means, we always say this at the end of the conferences, that the point wasn't just to come here and let off steam. It was to develop a plan that we could actually implement. Not that it was easy. We might try and fail, but at least we had something we could try. And I think now we have something that we can try, which is to say, since we're having a referendum in the fall anyway, since we're going through all the logistics of it and all the expense of it, which is trivial compared to running government, but still, it is quite an effort. Let's not just ask one question. Let's ask a series of questions in order not just to tell the Alberta government what we think it should be doing that perhaps it's not, but to give it a strong position to go and deal with the Canadian federal government and say, we didn't just make this up. This isn't political games, as people like to call it. This is the voice of the people. We asked them. And they said, yes, you really need to do this. And they've given us a mandate to insist on changes that will make Alberta happier within Confederation and that will make Canada better. And so I think what happens now, I hope what happens now is that, you go back home, or if you're joining us virtually, you stay back home and you talk to people, you talk to the family, friends, colleagues, this sort of thing, and say, here's an idea. Why don't we put this question, and this question on that ballot, along with or instead of whatever it is that the powers that be condescend to put before us. And again, you don't have to agree with the voice of the people in the room and the people watching. The question about jurisdiction, there were several that went into it. The Alberta Police Force is pretty straightforward. Alberta Pension Plan, I think, is pretty straightforward. But maybe you think some other question is better, and maybe when you start talking to people and stirring up popular sentiment, it'll turn out that there's more receptivity to that one than there was to one of ours. Or maybe there's not. Lockdowns, interestingly, preventing lockdowns, except through referendum, only got 14 votes. I would have thought it would be more, but, I didn't get to tell you what to say, and you didn't say what I would have told you to say if I had gotten to. So that's what happens when you consult the people. Sometimes they say, nope, you don't have this right, and we do. But I don't think there's anything controversial, especially in Alberta, about the idea that public policy ought to be shaped by the voice of the people through fairly direct input. So you're not fighting a hard fight on that point. And then as to what the questions ought to be, well, I think we've come up with some questions that are likely to be very popular, including the Alberta Police Force, for all kinds of reasons, including it shows that we're serious. There's been this long-standing problem of rural crime. There's something weird about a province as grown up as Alberta needing the federal police to come in. And then when something happens, including the High River gun grab, we can't seem to get any accountability. Let's bring it home. So to me, I think this is very encouraging. I like the exercise. I hope you liked using the app and the process of checking in real time whether the various questions and ideas that we thought were popular were actually popular within this gathering. And now I think it's time to just take that bigger, to go out and start saying, not just here's what we think should be on the referendum, but really critically, and I think this is an interesting and important new lever, to say there should be questions on the referendum that didn't come from the Premier's public relations staff. I think this is, again, I don't think a lot of people will say to you, oh yeah, we know we're having a referendum, but no, we don't want any control over the question. We want them to pick the question and then interpret the answer. I think there's probably very little support for that. There might be people saying, oh, why have a referendum, or boy, it's all hopeless. But among those who want a referendum, I imagine that 90% plus would want some say in what goes on the referendum. And again, it doesn't just have to be one question. It can be 4 or 5 questions. It could be 2 pages of questions. Because in order to say, well, no, we can't ask people a bunch of questions, you have to say, because we think voters are stupid. And politicians don't like to say that. Maybe you catch them with a hot mic and you'll hear them saying it. But if they know they're being listened to, that's not what they're going to say. And it's not true either. So there's a lot of scope here. This conference is the beginning, not the end. But I think it's the beginning of something that might really work. There's so few things that really work in public policy. You all know how frustrating it can be. But I think that it should be possible to create real momentum behind opening up that ballot question to a number of things that are essential to Albertans being, as Quebecers insist on being, in the quiet revolution, maîtres chez eux, masters in their own house. There's no reason why Albertans shouldn't be masters in their own house. And there's no reason why part of that process shouldn't be helping to dictate the ballot questions that they are asked, and insisting, once they have been asked, that their government listen to them and act on what they've said. And as a concluding point, to try and avoid a brawl instead of starting one, I think that once they've had a chance to get their minds around that, the people in power will realize that it's actually good for them, that this is a way to figure out where the parade is going and get back in front of it, which is what they'd like to do. So I thank you all again for taking part in this exercise in people power, and I hope that it will continue in the weeks and the months to follow.
Thank you, John. It's clear from the response in the room that everyone agrees with you. We appreciate you being here. And I think, does anybody have any quick comments, or should we just wrap up? I sense that so I guess, John, I think it's fair to say that over the course of the next few days, everyone who was registered both online and was here virtually, we'll send them an email that sort of summarizes in writing what what you've just said, and what the questions that we've agreed that we're going to try and move forward, and over the next weeks and months, we'll try and keep in touch with them to basically keep moving this agenda forward as far as talking to our neighbors and getting it onto the ballot. Is that fair to say?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, seeing no one standing up and wanting to say anything else, I'm just going to close I think the same way as I've closed 9 conferences now, which is with 2 quotes. One of them was from Pericles. It makes you wonder, like some of these guys who, it's amazing how they think of this, but Pericles said, when you look out over this great country that we all love, remember that it was built by men and women who knew their duty and had the courage to do it. And of course, there's lots of us who know our duty. And I mean, I think we're not just those of us online and in the room are not the only ones that know our duty. But quite frankly, like the world is led by people who have the courage to do it. So I want to thank all of you who are both here in the room and those of you who have taken the time to bear with us over the course of the last 2 days, because say as you like, we're all busy. Life is busy. We all have other commitments and things we should be doing, and or at least feel that we should be doing. And to take 2 days is to talk about the future of the province is quite frankly a fairly significant commitment. And I want to sincerely thank everyone, like I say, both watching virtually and those of you who are here in the room for taking the time to spend 2 days with us. And then my last quote, which we will end with, and it's my favorite Lincoln quote, and he said when he was leaving Illinois, which turned out to be for the last time, he said, friends, he said, as I leave you, he said, the future seems uncertain. In fact, more uncertain than it has ever seemed. But what is certain is that you here have become an important part of my life, and I will always cherish the time that we spent together. And as I leave you, I will pray that the one who can come with me and yet stay with you will watch over all of us and bless each one of you. So God bless you all. We'll look forward to seeing you at our 10th conference, if not before. Thank you very much, and thank you.